Okay, so today was Shabbat, which runs from Friday at sundown to Saturday at sundown. We talked about yesterday finding a place to eat because of Shabbat. It's very interesting. The elevators here, there are 4 elevators, and one is labeled as the Shabbat elevator because it stops at every floor, so one doesn't have to push any of the buttons for Shabbat. And let's see, is there anything else about Shabbat that you want me to say, Jen?
Nope, just that we ended up having to change our itinerary around because the markets were closed and so forth. So if you look at our daily itinerary, we didn't follow it.
Right.
Instead, well, what did we do today? Or yesterday? Shabbat. We had a great breakfast here in the hotel. Our first breakfast here in the hotel, and they've got this massive.
It's almost like an artistic display of food, but massive amounts of food.
What do I want to say? Where all the food laid out.
Yeah, cheeses and breads and eggplant and oh my God.
Anything you could want. And of course, I didn't take any pictures except one little picture of my plate. And so maybe tomorrow we'll take a picture of the buffet. But we had a great breakfast, and then we went off on a tour of the city, right? And so we went to a part of the city that we hadn't seen before, and we started out at the railway station. What's the significance of that?
Well, it was built in the late 1890s, and it was the place, it used to come in at the old Jaffa port, and it was the only place that pilgrims could come in. So they would come in Jaffa and then take the train to Jerusalem. And before the train was in place, you had to ride a camel or a horse to do a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. So this significantly changed pilgrimages and made Jerusalem much more accessible. And also the beginning, it was the birth of Tel Aviv, was right next to that train station, the early parts of Tel Aviv. And so Tel Aviv was born in 1919 or something like that, 1906.
Something like that.
Because there were more and more Jews that were emigrating, and there was some tension between the Arabs and the Jews in Jaffa. And so it was still the Ottoman Empire, and someone who had association or citizenship in the Ottoman Empire bought some land that was a sand dune, and then he sold the land to somebody who was Jewish. And then a Jewish, would be current day NGO, bought it and divided it up among 66 families. And they built on this sand dune and started, that was when Tel Aviv started. So it's incredible. Tel Aviv and its metropolis area is now 4.3 million people. And it started out as a sand dune, on a sand dune in 1906. So it's amazing how quickly it has grown. And it makes sense when you see the doubling of the immigrants coming to Israel. Do you have anything else you want to say about that?
I was going to say, so we went and visited the site of the railway station and some of the artifacts there. And then we walked into the neighboring district. And the first district of what became incorporated into Tel Aviv was Neve Tzendek. And these were really small homes that were clustered together so that I think 3 families would have adjoining homes, and then they would have 1 bathroom for the 3 families. So this district is the oldest district in what's now Tel Aviv, and is just now becoming trendy again.
It fell into disrepair, and you can see that in a few places.
One of the things that we visited there was a school that was built. We don't know exactly when it was built, but it was the first Hebrew-speaking school and it was for girls. The men's school was run by a different group, and they learned in French. This history of Neve Tzedek and Tel Aviv, matter of fact, almost everything, was given to us by Ashri, who was our guide. So from Neve Tzedek, we went on to another area where we ended up having some gelato.
Oh yeah, delicious.
Good gelato. I'm going to put on weight here. That was fun. We ended up that walk going down the Rothschild Boulevard and stopping in front of what was called the Dizengoff House, or the Independence House.
Yeah.
This was where
David Ben Gurion.
Yeah. Went ahead and signed the Declaration of Independence
for Israel in 1948, May 14th, I think, of 1948.
And so the building itself is starting to fall down, and they've started to build the steel work up around it to salvage the house.
Right. And we have since found out, and it was really very interesting, that as soon as David Ben Gurion made that recommendation, I read online that the Haganah became the major military force because Israel had basically no trained fighters other than people that had been fighting against the British. And so the Haganah became like the force, and now I've forgotten what I was going to say. This is still getting this figured out. So, and so the next day after, the military told David Ben Gurion that it was a 50-50 chance that Israel would win the war, because they knew as soon as they declared independence that the war would start. Because the UN was not coming over to oversee the partitioning, so they had to declare their independence. And as soon as they did, the next day they were invaded by 5 Arab nations: Lebanon, Syria, Jordan, Egypt, and...
I'm not sure who the fifth one was.
I can't remember. So,
yeah.
So they actually, it took them some time. There was some stumbling on the Israeli part, but they did basically get a ceasefire that expanded the boundaries of where what was considered Israel.
Right.
So.
And we walked to something called the Sarona Market, where we were going to have lunch. And the Sarona Market's located a little further inland from where we've been, and it was a bustling sort of place, and there was a lot of tall buildings being built around there, and the market itself was quite a hustling place.
Yeah, it was very crowded.
Terry what'd you have? You had...
We stopped at a fish place where they had high stools on a counter, and the workers were all inside, and they handed your food up on a glass case over the counter. The counter's here, the glass case here. You had to reach up, they would hand you your food, you'd get your food and pull it down. It wasn't an extensive menu, but it was a really interesting one. I had fish and chips, which is standard, and I love fish and chips, and it was really, really good. But Jim and I decided we would get 2 orders and get something else and then split it. So he got a sea bass, and the sea bass, it had a base of tzatziki, and then on the tzatziki were half cherry tomatoes cut in half with shallots, and something that was just a little spicy, maybe some oil that had spice in it, just a little spicy. And then the sea bass was set on top of the tzatziki and the shallots and tomatoes. Oh my God, I never thought of eating fish that way. It was so much better than the fish and chips. It was really, really good.
Right. Yeah, that was great, wasn't it? I was a little skeptical until I got into it, and then I ate it. I ate it all.
I had to fight to get some.
Yeah.
It's
And then we walked from there back around, and we went past, one of the things that we went past was this playground. And kids were riding scooters and driving these cars and things. And one of the weird things is they would drive the cars, they would leave the playground and go off on the walkways in the park. So,
yeah.
It was pretty wild.
And the parents controlled the cars. So there were, oh yeah, like there was like a 2 or 3-year-old in one car, and she's hanging onto the steering wheel, and the father is walking behind her, controlling it with a remote control.
Oh, I didn't see the remote
Yeah,
control.
because these were really young, pretty young kids.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and then from there we came back to the hotel and collapsed again for a little while, took a nap, and went out to dinner at a seafood place called Ben the Fisherman, where we all ate at big long tables. It was a communal meal with lots of wine. Matter of fact, so much red wine that some of it overflowed somebody's glass. Not saying whose, maybe mine, onto Terry's white sweater, which is something that we're dealing with now.
I think I got it out today. But it was really good. I do want to say something else about the Israeli war in 1948.
Okay. And then we got to go.
And that is that the U.S. put an embargo on military equipment. So they would not send any military equipment, and this is 48 after the war, to either Israel or the Arabs. So the U.S. tried to stay out of it. They got no military support from any other country except Czechoslovakia. So they got equipment from Czechoslovakia, and of course Czechoslovakia was Russian at the time. So Russia helped Israel get their independence, but nobody else in the world sent arms to them. So that's sort of where they're coming from, with feeling that they have to take care of themselves.
Right. And so do we. So, it's a bad transition, but we're late for dinner. So, bye-bye.
Bye. Love you guys.